If you're looking for an effective, affordable, and comprehensive way to get more height to take your truck off-road or just to fit larger wheels and tires, you're going to want to check out this 3.5-inch lift kit from Rough Country. Featuring new control arms, some hefty strut spacers, and a pair of their N3 shocks, this is going to give you extra height while leveling out the stance of your Ram and maintaining near factory ride quality, plus increasing off-road performance. Now, a quick note on fitment before we dive in. This kit is designed to fit 2019 and newer Ram 1500s that are not equipped with the factory air suspension. It is also not compatible with Rebel, RHO, or TRX models. First things first, let's talk tire size. Now, this at its core is a 3.5-inch lift kit, so it's going to provide you enough clearance to run some larger tires on your truck as well. You can get some beefy 33 by 12.5s in there. However, keep in mind the offset of your wheel does matter in this situation. If you have a high offset, you may encounter some rubbing with those 33s. Now, we're still going to recommend 33-inch tires with this kit. As you can see, they do fit nicely on our truck here, but we'll recommend sticking with a lower offset wheel to avoid any rubbing issues. Now, Rough Country does include some great things in this kit, but we're going to start up front with the control arms. And these are billed as heavy-duty upper control arms, and they include new Clevite rubber bushings, so they're going to provide excellent absorption of road impacts. The arms themselves are forged aluminum, much like your stock control arms, so they're pretty lightweight, but they have a lot of structural integrity, enough to hold up to whatever abuse you all can think to throw at them. Now, you might have noticed too, the ball joints are of course angled to accommodate the additional height. Adding quite a bit of height with this kit, these are going to keep things pretty close to your factory suspension geometry, meaning that everything should all work together and maintain factory ride quality plus a full range of motion, so you can take advantage of those bigger tires and the added ride height. Now, to actually get the front end lifted up, you've got a set of spacers. First, you've got these solid strut spacers that go on top and some preload spacers that insert into the top of your actual strut. Now, these are just going to bolt on to your original strut and move the strut down effectively to get the desired lift. Now, this is common, it's effective, and it's an inexpensive way to get the height you want out of your truck while maintaining that stock ride quality. Now, the spacers themselves are not going to measure the full 3.5 inches. The total of them together is just about 2 inches, as you can see right there. However, this is still going to add up to a 3.5-inch lift overall in the front end due to suspension geometry. Now, in the rear, we've got a similar type of setup. You've got a heavy-duty coil spring spacer that will lift the springs, or effectively extend them, and help maintain that stock geometry as well. These spacers are going to measure about 2.5 inches in height, so they will add just about 2.5 inches in total height to the rear of your truck. Now, in the back, you also get a set of Rough Country's N3 premium shocks included. These are nitrogen-charged shocks, and they have 10-stage variable damping to keep the ride smooth out on the road while still doing a good job of absorbing impacts and controlling rebound when you're out on the trail. They also feature chromed-hardened piston rods with a huge piston and these big shock bodies for durability. So with that 3.5-inch lift in the front and about a 2.5-inch lift in the rear, this is also going to function as a leveling kit to eliminate the rake that Rams come with from the factory. So instead of sitting a bit lower in the front, higher in the rear, once you've got everything installed, this will sit pretty much dead even front to back. Now, we've already touched on some of this, but construction here is all quite solid. As we already discussed, the control arms up front are made of that forged aluminum for strength and weight savings. Plus, they include new greasable ball joints. You got a Zerk fitting right up top there with these caps that you can just pop off, and those new Clevite rubber bushings. There's no seams or welds to break on these, so you can be sure they're extra strong. The spacers that go on top of your struts are made from steel, and they're finished in a black powder coat and fully welded together, so these are very, very strong. The preload spacers and your rear spring spacers are made from a composite material, so there's no welds, there's nothing that's gonna rust on these, making them extra durable, plus they're very lightweight. Now, the rear shocks have this massive 1 3/8 inch bore, plus that chromed and hardened piston rod that is 46 millimeters around. So they're gonna stand up to the elements very well too. The bodies of the shocks are finished in a silver powder coat for good looks and some extra durability. Plus, you get all new hardware included in this kit too, making it very complete. Coming in at about $750, this is actually a pretty affordable kit considering everything you get here. Now, if you're after that height and some additional performance, but you want a more economical price tag, this is gonna do everything you need to and then some for that good price. You'll also be set up in the future to change out the front struts or shocks if you decide you want more performance. And in the meantime, you can get the height you want and the look you want without breaking the bank. As far as install goes, we're gonna give this kit a 3 out of 3 on our difficulty meter, and you should budget about 6 hours or so to get it installed. Now you can certainly do this at home in your driveway, especially since everything you need to get it done is included. However, it is a bit of an involved job. If you aren't necessarily comfortable disassembling suspension components or using a spring compressor, which you will need for this job, professional installation is always an option. But you can tackle this yourself if you've got enough time and you've got the proper tools. Make sure too you get your truck aligned once you've got everything buttoned up, because you are changing around suspension geometry and lifting the front end. All that said, and my PSAs out of the way, let's head over to the shop and we will walk you through this install process step by step.
All right, for this install, you're gonna need a pry bar, a cutoff tool, a 1/2-inch impact driver, a 3/8 ratchet, a 19mm wrench, 16mm wrench, 21mm wrench, also a 5/16 socket, along with a 16, 18, various 21mm sockets, a 22 and a 24, also a pair of vice grips, a clip removal tool, and a hammer or mallet. Also not shown on camera, you will need a set of jack stands and a floor jack and possibly a pole jack. Today we're going to be installing a lift kit on our Ram, but first we're going to watch a quick uninstall of the front and rear suspension, and we'll meet you right back here when you get finished.
First things first, guys, of course you want to get your truck up in the air, whether you're using a lift or if you're working on the ground with the jack and jack stands. Now I got my 22 socket here in my air tools. I'm going to get this wheel out of the way so we can get started. First thing we're going to do with the wheel out of the way is disconnect a couple of ABS line clips. That way, when we're lowering down our entire spindle, it's not putting extra pressure on our brake lines. Now, this line here, the ABS line and the brake line are connected. So we're going to pull back on this plastic clip to disconnect and slide those guys out. Follow the ABS line up and it's connected to the upper control arm. We're going to wiggle that guy back and forth to disconnect it. Follow it back down to the spindle and there's one more to pull out. All right, now on the back of the spindle, you'll see this metal clip. It's more of an S shape. We're just gonna wiggle this rubber grommet out of that. And now you can see this whole thing's loose and has a lot of slack. Next step, we're gonna pick up our 21mm deep socket and we're gonna loosen it and remove the nut holding on our tie rod end. Now what I like to do is once I have that nut off, pull the tie rod end out, and I like to put the nut back on just so we don't lose it. Next, we're going to remove the bottom bolt of our strut. Now, it's a 21mm bolt head with a 15/16 nut on the opposite end. So I've got my wrench on the nut there and my 21 on the bolt head. We're going to get this guy off. Now, we may need a hammer to tap this out, but if you can wiggle it out, you can do that now. All right, next we want to remove the bottom of our sway bar end link nut and the upper control arm to spindle nut. Those things are going to have the entire spindle drop down, or the lower control arm as well. And we want to make sure we have that weight supported so it doesn't drop down on us. So if you're working on a lift, grab a pole jack at this point. If you're working on the ground, a hydraulic jack will do the trick. All right, next up we're going to grab an 18mm deep socket and loosen and remove the bottom nut of our sway bar end link that connects to the lower control arm. Now in theory, you could remove the top portion that connects to the sway bar, but I find it easier to do it this way just because there's a lot more room to work with and I can get an impact gun on here. So now we can take the 18 and remove it. With this out of the way, when we go to lower this thing down, the sway bar won't stop it from going as low as we need it. All right, so next we want to tackle the upper control arm to the spindle bolt. Now when we're trying to loosen it, this is going to rotate back and forth. In order to keep it from doing that, to make our lives easier, I'm just going to take this nut off and put our tie rod end back on. Now we don't have to tighten it down, but that'll keep it from moving around too much and help us out. With your lower control arm still supported, grab a 13/16 wrench or a 21, and you're going to go in here and break this upper control arm to spindle nut loose. We have this loose, I'm going to bring the nut down to a couple of the last threads. We're not going to completely remove the nut just yet. As you can see, the spindle is still attached to the upper control arm. We need to grab a hammer and break this guy loose so it'll jolt free. If you completely remove this nut, that'll break free and it'll drop down. So this is going to help catch it. Then we'll come back and remove it. So we're going to grab a hammer and tap on the actual spindle. You don't want to hit the upper control arm. You don't want to risk damaging the bushing. So we're going to hit this side right here on the spindle. All right, so you saw us break that loose. Now we can remove our nut. I'm gonna grab a pry bar and put it on the coil and pull down on the upper control arm. That way we can disconnect them. Let's work that nut off. All right, I'm gonna drop that off to the side for now. You wanna grab the spindle and slowly let go of the upper control arm. Now we can bring this down. Now I'm just gonna take that nut and again, just thread it up on the upper control arm just so we don't lose it. All right, now we have our truck lowered a little bit to gain access to the top of our strut. Now there's 3 nuts. If you push this liner back a bit, 1 in the front right here, and then 2 at the back. Now you'll see the wire is actually mounted to the top of that, so we'll be able to pop those off in just a bit. I would definitely recommend a 16mm ratcheting wrench. I have a longer guy here to give me a little bit more leverage. This is gonna make life a lot easier just ratcheting back and forth. Otherwise, you can use a regular wrench or a ratcheting socket if you can get it in there. So let's get these 3 nuts off. All right, so now I'm just reaching my hand back in here and I'm gonna wiggle back and forth the wiring harness to get them off of the stud. All right, so we got one of them off, this little clip. Just pull that back and rotate it up. Let's do the same thing on the other one. And again, I know this is tough to see, but really just pushing it out of the way. All right, so now we're switching back over to our ratcheting wrench and we're gonna work off the last 2 bolts. All right, at this point, the strut is loose. We just have to get it out of position. So in order to do that, I'm gonna push down on the entire spindle lower control arm assembly, lift this guy up, and pop it out. Just like that.
All right, since our kit does come with a new upper control arm, we will need to remove our stock one. It's just 2 21mm bolts on either side. All right, you need to do the same thing for the other side.
All right, now moving on to the front. Now that we have the strut removed, we can put it onto our coil compressor so we can press the coil down, remove the top hat, and install our spacer. So once we have it all set up in the coil compressor, we're gonna tighten down so we can get that nut free. Now we can use our 18mm socket to undo the middle of the bolt. Now with our nut still in there, we can remove the entire strut assembly. All right, now with our spring compressed, we're gonna carefully undo the tension so we can then take the top hat off and get our spacer in there. And now you can remove the top hat. All right, now that we have the top hat disassembled, we're gonna remove the top collar and our spacer is gonna go right in between here, just like that. All right, now we're gonna take our spacer, insert it on top, and put the assembly back in. All right, now that we have the spacer installed, we can now set it back up into our compressor and compress the spring down so we can get the strut back up. Now that we have that compressed a little bit, we're gonna try to see if we can get our strut up in there. Now that we have our strut fully through, we can now put our nut on and thread that back down. Using our pass-through socket with an 18mm socket on the end, we can tighten it down. Once we get that nut tightened down, we can now uncompress the spring. Once we got that on there, we can repeat for the other side. All right, now we can take the spacer and place it onto the factory strut with the also additional spacer on the spring. Just take note of orientation on this. We're gonna slide this on and using our factory nuts and hardware, we're gonna tighten this down on all 3. Using our 16, we're gonna tighten this down. All right, once you have 3 studs tightened down, the directions do say to trim this so it can sit a little bit flush. So at this point, you can take a marker and mark it where you need to and then cut it off. All right, now we're gonna mark where we're gonna cut our studs. Now we're gonna take the nuts back off the spacer and cut them off of the table. All right, now with our cutoff wheel and proper eye protection, we're gonna cut off the top of these studs. Just a tip, once you've marked your stud, you can put your nut back on, thread it on, and that way you have a nice guide to cut your stud off, and then when you back out, you can redo your threads. All right, we're gonna actually switch to an electric one to make this cutting a little bit easier. All right, once we've cut all the way through the stud, now we can back out our nut and clean up the threads. Now we can back this out with our 16mm socket. Just be careful, the studs might be hot. Once you have one cut, you can repeat for the other 2 studs. Before we can put the spacer on, we're going to actually put our studs through on each end. We have one position here, here, and here. Just keep note that one position is for the strut side. So we're gonna line all 3 in position, and we're also gonna take our jam nut, slide it over, and one by one, we're gonna thread this on and tighten it in until that stud presses into the body. We're gonna take our 16 on our impact. You can do this with the wrench and the pliers, but we're gonna do it with our impact. Once we have that fully seated on the bottom, we can now reverse off the nut. Once we have the stud fully seated, we can now take off our nut and our jam nut and repeat for the other 2 bolts. Now we can take our spacer and install it to the top of our strut. Using the factory bolts, we're gonna tighten them down. And with our 16mm on the impact, we're gonna tighten it down. And now we're gonna come back and torque this down to factory spec, and then we're gonna get this in the vehicle. And after you get all this installed, we're gonna repeat for the other side. All right, now we can take our strut assembly and install it into the mount. You just let it sit in the perch and the strut top. Now we can install our strut top nuts. We'll get a couple started just to hold it in place for us. All right, we're gonna come back later and tighten this down. Now we can line up our bottom strut mount into the control arm. Using our pole jack, we're just gonna lift up a little bit so we can get it lined up in there. Once you have that roughly level to the point, you can slide your bolt in. If you need to at this point, you can tap the bolt in with a hammer. Once you get your bolt through, you can now put your nut on. And at this point, with your pole jack here supporting some weight, you can now attach the bolt for your end link. All right, with our end link through the control arm, we can now attach our nut and tighten this up with our 18mm socket. Now we can remove the tension off the pole jack and move back up top. All right, now that we have our end link tightened and everything supported, we remove the pole jack so we can now move on to our lower strut bolt. We can tighten this up with a 24mm socket and a 21 wrench on the other end. And we can come back and torque that down to spec. Now we can put our tie rod end back into the knuckle. Thread on our bolt and tighten this down with our 21mm socket. Now we can get our control arm fitted into the mount. You might need a hammer or mallet to tap this in. Once we have the control arm in, now we can line up our bolts. Now we can back our bolts out a little bit to get our flag nuts in. Now we can install the other side. Now we can tighten this up with our 21mm socket. And we can tighten down this further with our 21 mil wrench. Now we can install the upper control arm ball joint into our knuckle. We might need to pry up or down to get this inserted. Once we lift up on it, we can now push this in. Might need to use a hammer to smack it into place. Now we can get our new hardware on there. Prying down on this makes it a little bit easier to get the nut started. Tighten this up with our 21 wrench. Now we can tighten up our top bolt with our 16 mil ratcheting wrench. All right, the rear two are kind of hard to see, but you can get back there once you feel it around. Now we can clip our wheel speed sensor back in place. All right, once you have your control arm in and your strut in and everything tightened down, you want to torque everything down to spec and repeat for the other side.
All right, first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna get our vehicle supported, get some pull jacks under the axle to support the weight, and then we just need to take out our bolt for our track bar on our driver's side. So we're gonna grab our impact and 21 millimeter socket and take that out. All right, now we're gonna come to our rear sway bar link. We're gonna take our upper bolt out for our mount. So we're gonna grab our impact and 16 millimeter socket and take that out. All right, now we're gonna come to our shock. We're gonna take our lower mount off. So we have our bolt here. We're gonna take a 21 millimeter wrench and our impact and 21 millimeter socket and take that off. All right, now you can go ahead and repeat the same thing for the shock and the sway bar link on the other side. All right, now that we have everything disconnected, what we're gonna do is we're just gonna evenly lower the rear axle so we can get our springs out. You just wanna keep an eye on your brake lines and all of your other harnesses and hoses along the axle. Just make sure you're not pulling on anything. If we need to, we'll disconnect some attach points if we need to.
Welcome back. The kit that we actually have also requires the installation of rear shocks. So we're going to do so by removing both the inner fender liners and also the rear shocks assemblies. We're going to start off by removing a couple 5/16 bolts here to get off the fender liner. And now we can get to this last one with our 5/16. All right, now we're gonna remove this top bolt here. It's an 18 millimeter on our ratcheting wrench. We're gonna slide this over, get that lined up, and then we'll also use a pair of vice grips to clamp onto the bolt. Once you take this top bolt off, you wanna rest a hand on the strut itself so it doesn't fall out. And don't forget your upper bushing. All right, once you have the rear strut assembly out, you're gonna repeat for the other side. All right, for our new shock absorber, we're gonna need to transfer over the collar and some bushings from the old one. So we're gonna take our bushing, set that off to the side, pull off the bottom one, and also the collar. And we're gonna take the new one, slide the collar back on, get that fitted on, same exact direction, slide that on, and then this is gonna go into the body, and this is gonna go on top. Once you have that transferred over, you're gonna repeat for the other shock. Now we can install our new shock. Lined up in the mount there. And while holding that in place, we can take our new hardware and thread that on. All right, our new hardware is actually gonna be a 19 millimeter socket. So we're gonna get our wrench on there, see if we can get it started a little bit. And once that starts spinning, we're gonna need our vice grips and clamp it down. Once you get your vice grips locked on, you can now start tightening this down. Once you get your upper shock installed and tighten down the nut, you're going to torque that down to factory spec and then repeat for the other side. All right, now for our spring spacer for the rear, it's actually going to mount up into the original housing, but we're also going to add this plate on top. So it's going to slide over just in there, and then it's going to mount underneath with the bolt going through. All right, now that we have our plate right in place right there, we're going to slide in our spacer, hold that up, and thread in our bolt. And we can also reach on top to kind of hold the spacer and the plate together. All right, once you have that in there, a couple threads, it should stay in place. And now you can take a 14mm deep socket and a 15mm wrench to hold it together. Once you have that tightened down and secured inside there, you're gonna repeat for the other side. Now we can line up our spring, fit that in there, and pull down on our axle. Once we got our rubber boot in place and spring seated on the bottom, we can repeat for the other side. All right, now that we have both shocks installed and both rear springs, we're gonna evenly lift up on our axle to get everything lined up. All right, now we're at the halfway point of lifting up our axle. We're actually gonna lift up our track bar and get the bolt lined up. And on the back end, we're gonna use our flag nut and get that threaded. Now we can tighten this down with our 21mm socket. Now we can continue lifting up on our axle. Now that we have our axle high enough, we can now start mounting up our sway bar end link. Tighten this down with our 16mm impact, and you can repeat for the other side. All right, now we're gonna mount our bolt to our bottom of our strut. Now we can tighten this down with our 21mm impact and our 21 wrench. Once you get that snugged up, you want to torque that down to spec and repeat for the other side. Now we can install our fender liner. Now we can tighten this up with the 5/16. After you have your fender liner installed, you want to repeat for the other side.
That's going to wrap it up here for our review and install of the Rough Country 3.5-inch suspension lift kit with the front strut spacers and rear premium M3 shocks, fitting 2019 and newer four-wheel drive Ram 1500s without air ride, also excluding Rebel, RHO, and TRX models. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, for all things Ram, be sure to stick with us right here at AmericanTrucks.com.